Last week, we worked with tender spots. And this week, we're going to be working with take yourself back. So, in tender spots, just to review, we seed the storm, we chose the 5 articles of clothing, and then we moved to an unattractive characteristic, writing about something unattractive like the ear sticking through the hat, the hair. And then the James list was how do you soothe your tender spots? And then we had empathy with a villain. And then the surf the storm was the animal avatars. So before we go on, did anybody do any thinking around animal avatars? I said Marlon Brando's animal was a bulldog with a bullet in its throat um, for The Godfather. Any thoughts on animals and how they fit into what you're trying to do? Did you discover anything?
Did you come up with that for Marlon Brando, or was that something that he came up with?
I don't remember. I
Because it's
remember when I
great.
when I was taking the acting classes at Susan Batson's studio in New York, Black Nexus, which is now Susan Batson Studio instead of Black Nexus. I learned that in those classes because part of the assignment for character development was go to the zoo, pick an animal, and take on all of the characteristics of the animal. Now, I was not able to do that, but people that were developing big roles in movies or in plays would go to the zoo and study the animal and then play with the way the animal moved and build around the animal, infuse the character with the animal's characteristics, and walk like the lion or walk like the elephant. And it was all about character development. And that's where I heard that. And it was just so dramatic. It was like a bulldog with a bullet in his throat. And so you can see that in his
Hmm.
character. And most people that develop characters, and Katie's done acting. I think you have too, I believe, Sue. They'll often work with animals. What's the animal? How does the animal move? Am I a snake? Am I a giraffe? And you can switch out. The snake would move one way, a giraffe would move another, an elephant another, a badger a different way. So that's
Yeah.
you
I
know
see animals in all sorts of people on TV, but it's hard to choose an animal for yourself. I mean, I have an animal that I love and I like to think is my animal, but
yeah.
I'm probably more like a chipmunk than a lion. Who
Well, I
knows?
mean, it's
But
like the
yeah.
yeah, like
Anyway,
the
I don't
like
want to
the
take up a bunch of time with that.
no, we can, but like the example of the lion, as I used last week. The lion is a most unsuitable creature in real life. It lays around, doesn't do much of the hunting, lets all the women do the work, and it just eats and kind of overlords the group, the family. But in American culture, in Western culture, the lion is the majestic creature. But the guy from Africa said, "Well, they're not all that majestic. They're lazy." Uh, so both of those come to play. So it's
Mhm.
just worth thinking about. And then when you're working with different characters, uh, like if you're working with a poem and you're memorizing it, like I have one called The End of the Seers Convention. It has 7 different wizards talking. So I have an animal for each wizard in my head when I think of the wizard speaking. That it is like one's a pink flamingo and another one's like a little gnarled rat and another one's a hippopotamus. And so your voices change. So that's the idea behind the animals. So that was where we were last week, tender spot. So this week we're going to take ourselves back. And so we're going to do roles as the seed the storm prompt. Then we're going to do a prompt called title, take yourself back. And then the James list, times when you were in the wrong, and a prompt, the need that drives you. And then the surf the storm prompt is your own tender spots. So that's what we're going to be working with today. And this one is titled Take Yourself Back. And so the idea here in this work today, we're going to travel back to other times in our lives. Back in our memories, we're going to take ourselves back, but also in the work, you can ask yourself, is there something I need to do to reclaim my authority, to reclaim my sovereignty, or to build it out more? So, what kind of desires, needs, values do I need to look at? So, it's taking yourself back in time, but also getting your own authority as well. So, that's what we're up to today. So, this first Seed the Storm prompt is fairly simple. I want you to take 5 minutes and make a list of roles you've played in your life. Some roles are practical: parent, chauffeur, chef, nurse, mentor. Others are social and psychological: problem solver, victim, clown, truth teller, therapist. So take 5 minutes and make a list of, and be very liberal with yourself on this. Make list of the things that are good, that are bad, the roles you've played, and see what you come up with. And I'll give you 5 minutes to do that, and we can begin now. Off you go. Okay. So now you have a list of roles, and I just jotted down some these are some of the roles that I've played: fixer, star of the show, preacher, intellectual, good guy, director, traveler, loyal friend, bandit, thief, betrayer. So as I was listing my roles, I was thinking about the animals and the lions. The majestic lion, or the bum on the corner sleeping and not doing any work. So bandit, thief, betrayer. I played all those roles at some time in my life. So we don't necessarily play roles that are always the most suitable roles, or the positive roles, but they are roles. So now here's what I want you to do for 10 minutes with your writing. Look at the roles that you've listed and take one that has some that you are maybe attached to, or you feel like is really well fixed, and and as you're looking at those roles, which one suited you best? Ask that question as you're looking at these roles. Is there a role that you would like to play that you don't play? Is there a role that you'd like to play better? So these are the questions. So pick one and talk about for 10 minutes. How did it suit you? Did it suit you at all? Would you like to play this role better, or would you like to get rid of it, or and not play it at all? Would you like to switch it out for another role? So spend 10 minutes just playing around with one of those roles, asking those questions in the 10-minute timed writing. So let's go with that starting now. Off you go. Okay. So this chapter, session 8, take yourself back. So part of what we've been doing throughout this whole time, you've been looking at different areas in your life, examining your roles when you were joined the tribe. And as you've explored this, your memory has always been at work, pulling things out, remembering this, remembering that. And what happens as you move through this work, you start to understand that the memory has its own way of offering you an accuracy, and then it might change tomorrow. So the memory could change as you go through. And so part of this is trusting how that memory is going to sort out all of these stories that you're working with, all of these ideas, all these things that you're exploring. You're investigating the scene, and the scene is you. And so the roles that you play can be almost anything, but they may not be exactly like what you thought they would be. So did you discover anything when you were playing around with these roles that you maybe I need to revise this? Anybody? Sue shook her head. What do you have to say about that, Sue?
Well, decided to choose the role of mother.
Mm,
Um, I looked at all the other ones that, were all so sexy, but I thought, no, I'm going to choose mother
mm,
because I was a mother late in life. And I suppose I never wanted to turn into my own mother. And I realized that I can't help myself but be this warrior. And
boom.
I don't want to be a warrior. I
That's
want to
it.
be the warrior again. But I'm a warrior and I'll be a mother warrior, I think, forever, which unfortunately sort of comes with a job that I didn't think I'd signed up for. I mean, you worry about your pets. So I remember a friend of mine saying, you love your dog, because I had dogs, until I was 40 and then decided I wanted to be a mother. And she's like, you're going to love your child 1,000 more times than you love your dog. And I just thought, nah. But yes, it's true.
Uh,
And you work from the moment he started sucking milk out of my breast from being placed on my chest, I was catapulted into this worry. And
Ah.
I'm always looking for a way to just, stop worrying.
Well,
But with the world as it is, and I have a black son, I worry him being in America, anyway, blah, blah, blah. But
and
that's
you
what I was writing about, my
and
worry.
rightfully so. There's plenty to worry about. The question in a story that you might write, you have the warrior, which is one role, the mother, which is another role, which you play both. So how does the warrior take the worry and turn it into usable strategy? So that would be an
Yeah.
interesting thing to explore. How does the warrior, how does the worry inform the warrior's strength and strategy rather than take it away? Because worry is a really fantastic, useful process as long as you don't let it wrap itself around you and drag you down. But it's full of information. So how do you take the role of the mother and the warrior and put them together? So you have the baby on one hip and you have the sword in the other hand, and you charge across the ridge thinking, the baby will delight in my warriorness because this is what we do, warrior and mother. So it's that's the idea of taking yourself back. This is one truth. The truth is I am a warrior. The other truth is I am a warrior. I'll bet you're not always a warrior. I'll bet there are
No.
other huge strengths that are there. How do you create that? And then can you transform something like that in a story that will give me, the audience, enough insight so that I am able to alchemize my worry? Here we are back to alchemy. Alchemize my worries into some kind of strategy that will work for me. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it just puts you down and you can't do anything, hardly breathe because you worry so much. Anyway, anybody else have any thoughts on this? I'm trying to keep close track of time. Yes, Katie.
I mean, being aware of worrying is you're one step ahead of the game.
Mm,
So you're
yes.
already away from your worrier just by acknowledging that you're worrying. So remember that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And it's only one letter between worrier and warrior.
That's true.
Thank you,
And you are a
Katie.
warrior, not a worrier. Because you're a mother, and all mothers are warriors.
Martin?
He's on mute.
Oh, you're muted.
Martin, you're on mute, so we
He
can't hear
can't
you.
hear you.
I found that my worry, when I work through, or when a worry works itself through and it's gone or dwindles out, something immediately takes its place. It comes right in, and so you can't. I have a hard time reveling in the fact that I'm worry free, because something it's like a vacuum. that pulls something back in. Some other thing will just pop right up. It always happens.
Mhm.
Worry is an asset, just like mess is currency. It's what you do with it. It's like,
Right.
am I going to let my fears and my worries about the collapse of civilization stop me from engaging right now? And I'm not going to do that. I won't do it. I might have to suffer to not do it, but I will not do that because that's not in my brief, and I have some control over that.
Worry and anxiety are so
Hmm.
similar, if not
Hmm.
identical. And I
Hmm.
think anxiety is a really important human quality
Hmm.
because it helps us figure out danger and
Hmm.
it helps us read things that we need to be aware of.
Yeah,
Whether you're paralyzed by it is another matter altogether.
exactly.
But,
Yeah,
it's about not being paralyzed by it.
yeah. It's part of our animal instinct.
Exactly.
That anxiety comes, it's like, this is just not right. I do not like
It's
to look.
chemical.
Yeah,
It's
I mean,
chemical.
yesterday I was on my walk and I went down this street and it was early, early morning. And, there was a chain across the street, and then it was a paved concrete road that went just way out into what will eventually be a development. And I went, I'm not going to walk down that road. It didn't look that dangerous, but I thought, mm-mm. And I didn't go down it.
Sixth sense.
Something wrong, something not right about that. Maybe a dog, maybe somebody down there, no lights, early morning. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Invitation.
In
There was
there.
a
So this is also about authority. Your authority, which is also, I call the author, you're the author of your story. You're the one writing the damn thing. I'm the authority of whether I walk across that rope and go down that road or not. And I said, no. Or if you get an email from somebody you haven't heard from in a long time who was quite an antagonist, who somehow figures out your email again and decides to loop back around after a year and a half and start critiquing you again
Ooh
because
la
of
la.
what you did previously, filled with barbs and hooks, what do you do with it?
you block them.
Delete.
You
Delete.
block them and you shut it down and you don't respond, just like you don't go across that fence. That happened to me 3 days ago.
Mm,
One of
wow.
those emails appeared. Um, and if you've ever had an experience with somebody shell gaming you and taking things from you that you can't give back, that person was a character that does such a thing. And she was in my life and she looped back around. Cut it down, shut it. So that's taking yourself back and knowing you have the ability to create that not only in your daily life, but in the writing. You don't have to apologize for any of this. You can always toss it. So let's move on. I love these conversations. We'll have a big one at the end of session 11. That's what this is all about. We'll talk for 2 hours or however long you want. But for now, let's continue on with roles. But this role is the prompt is take yourself back. And this is something that you all have worked with before. You're starting to question your judgments right now. And in a good way, you're starting to think, well, maybe my memories aren't as accurate as I thought they were. I can make these choices. Maybe worry is an asset, not a liability. I wonder what I can do with that. So I want you to think about a time in your life, and this is a build on the crazy makers in Julia Cameron's Artist Way. If you hadn't cashed that child support check, it wouldn't have bounced, would be what a crazy maker might say. Um, it's an old joke, but it still fits. So think about a time in your life when you've felt diminished or you felt railroaded, gaslighted by other people's expectations, their judgments. Have you been conned? Has somebody fooled you by telling you what you wanted to hear and then you fell for it? Or have you done it in reverse? Have you ever railroaded somebody? Have you ever done gaslighting? Um, and have you ever given your power away So this is what we're looking at, a time in your life when you felt like you gave your power away. Now, if you're gaslighting somebody or if you're railroading somebody deliberately or maybe subconsciously, in a sense, you're giving your power away. It's a kind of a powerless place to be. It's not a good thing to do. Or have you ever given your power away to somebody else because you wanted to be so loved by them, or that you just fell down to worship when you shouldn't have? So um, I'd like for you to take 5 minutes and just make a list of times in your life when you've been gaslighted, you've given your power away, or you've done it to somebody else. And then we'll move to a 10-minute timed writing after that. So off you go,
What,
five
is this a
minutes.
list? This is a
It's just a
list?
list. Just make a list,
Okay.
just an inventory, just remembering a bit. And it's similar to the previous list of roles that you played and working with the roles. So just make a list of times you've given your power away. 5 minutes. Close it out. Okay, wind it up. Now, as you probably have experienced, when you're doing this, you're creating all kinds of emotional atmosphere that comes up, bubbles up when you're thinking about this. Last week we talked about tender spots. That's still at play here. So we're still on that idea of what's tender. What do you feel? How do you feel about it? So now what I'd like for you to do is to of the times you listed, and you know this is good information. Keep it. You can work with all of these times. It's all about building out these stories, and these stories you can build them out as memoirs. You could build them out as poems. You could also use any of these situations for characters in a short story or a novel that you want to write, or you can make a song out of it. All of this is material to build out from your life. And so, what I'd like for you to do now is to pick one of those times that you listed. Make a choice. One time that you listed, one that vibes with you, one that maybe you've been thinking about, one you have some questions about. Um, and write for 10 minutes. And here's what I'd like for you to explore these two questions. When did I take myself back, or might I still need to? So talk about the situation and talk about how you dealt with it, how you regained your power, if you did or you didn't, how it drained you, how you felt about it. How does your body feel when the emotions in your body? So take 10 minutes and just work with one of those, working with the question, did I take myself back? When did you do it, or do you still need to do that? So here we go, 10 minutes. So I wanted to just before we move to the James list and do that, and then we'll take a break. I wanted to just read something that we wrote, just a couple of paragraphs here because I think it's important. Most of us think of a story in terms of things that happened, dramatic events, milestones, a crisis. You might think you're supposed to start work on a memoir by carving a story out of your life using those instances as waypost. You can tie yourself up in knots trying to create an outline, and likely you'll end up with one that makes rational sense. How do you feel when you look at it? Energized or tired? The answer is tired when your outline isn't making imaginative sense. So we're talking a lot these days about imaginative intelligence. What makes imaginative sense? And then the second paragraph, the imaginative storm approach is to let your imagination tell you which events are important rather than trying to figure it out rationally by simply generating material around the story you want to tell. So this is part of the imaginative intelligence, just generating stuff around the story you want to tell. And when you think back to Kaleidoscope of the Mind, the first session when we did other people's words and I recited the poem and then you wrote the words down and then we looked at pick some emotions and work with those emotions, describe an incident in your life using these emotional tones. So this is about letting the imagination generate all of this emotional connection. And what people care about, they don't really care about what happens to you. People aren't interested in that as much as they are, how did it affect you? How did it mess with your mind? So you don't want to know about me walking down the highway on a sunny afternoon 25 years ago in Alabama, enjoying the sunset and cars going past. What you want to know is one car passed and a beer bottle brushed my face and rolled down the highway at 50 miles an hour because it was thrown from the car. That's what happened. But what happened to me is I almost sank to my knees because I realized it brushed me. I was almost dead. And I was younger then. And I felt a tightening. The beer bottle almost hit me. And the sun was still going down slowly in the west. And nothing had changed. Nothing at all. So that's what we're after, the emotionalism, because you can buy into that idea because suddenly you're on the road and the beer bottle is whooshing by your head. And you've probably had that happen before. So how does it affect you? So keeping on with this, and you'll be able to choose one of these to read. This James list is going to be a little bit different because it's not as lighthearted. So we're going into times when you've been disturbed, the gaslight, somebody lied to you or you lied to somebody. Now, this time, I want you to spend 10 minutes thinking about, and you may not actually come up with this, but take 10 minutes to think about this and jot it down as you're thinking. Don't have to, this is not necessarily about writing. This is research. This is taking notes. The first time in your life when you absolutely, no question about it, knew you were in the wrong. The first time you knew it. And when Allegra and I started to talk about this, I was like, well, I don't know. I've been in the wrong a lot. I was very casual about it. And she said, no, the first time you were in the wrong. And then I realized that time, oh my God. And it was when I was a boy, I was 12. I had a shotgun. We lived in the country, Western North Carolina. I wanted to impress my father because I wanted to be a hunter. So I went out early morning and there was brush and I saw a covey of quail and I fired my shotgun into the covey of quail and killed the birds on the ground, took the birds back to my father. And then somewhere along the way, when he looked at me, he wanted to know, did I shoot them on the ground? And I did. And that, even to this day, makes me feel sick. They flopped around after I shot them. I didn't shoot them on the wing. I was completely, utterly in the wrong. There may have been other times when I was in the wrong, but that is the first time I remember profoundly feeling like I was totally in the wrong and I absolutely knew it and I couldn't do anything about it. So take 10 minutes and think about a time when you were in the wrong. You were the bad one.
Does anybody know?
Yes, 10 minutes starts now. 10 minutes starts now. I'm timing it. And start to wind it up. And close it down. So when we come back from the break, we're going to pick up and we'll work on this list that you've generated here, these thoughts. Did you come, before we go, with our break, did you come across anything that surprised you? Are you a villain and you didn't know it? Sue's a villain.
Yeah,
Look
I
out for
am.
Sue. Watch out for Katie. All
But yeah, no,
right.
I've always been the villain.
Katie's always been the villain. I am too,
In the
actually.
family, I think it's about family role play and the
There
role
you
that you
go.
get cast in
Yeah,
family. So
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. hmm
villain and soothsayer.
My mother
They
always said
sometimes go
I was a harbinger,
hard.
and she said of the four children, you're the least empathetic.
Sympathetic or empathetic?
Empathetic.
Oh, interesting. And
You,
where were you in the birth order?
I was first.
Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
but she said your problem is you're not that empathetic and you're vulnerable.
Mm.
Those two work against each other, she said. I'm like, okay.
Wow.
So let's take a 10-minute break and come back, and then we'll move into the last exercise, and then we'll do our reading and our close. So see you all in 10 minutes. All right, getting close. Dara, I hope you appreciated my story of someone looping back around in my life.
Oh, I knew what you were talking about. And I actually pretty much figured out how that happened. An Instagram post I posted about how interesting it is to be in this group. And
Ah,
probably saw that because
that's
I don't, yeah,
that's exactly where it came from.
exactly. And it's funny, I knew instantly who you meant.
Well, I knew you would.
Oh, I was going to ask you afterwards when,
No.
at the end of the session privately, but yeah, I get it. Yeah, checking in, stepping in. No, you got to keep it. Same thing to me. Same
Yeah.
thing to me.
Dara and I had that comment about the person that showed up. We had a similar experience with the same person.
Oof. Sorry.
Barbara, you're focused tonight.
My son just came home.
Oh, okay.
The dog's barked. He just came in for the holidays. Okay, I think that the drama of the dog seeing a stranger walk in is over.
Okay, that's perfect. We're glad about that. So as soon as let's see, we got Katie back and Mary's back. This last prompt is it's going to tie into the James list. So before we go to the last prompt, did you discover a time when the first time you were in the wrong? There's only one answer to this.
Mhm.
When you first realize it, first time in your life you realize you were in the wrong. Not the first time you necessarily were in the wrong, but when you actually figured it out. Oh, I shouldn't have shot those quail. Did you come upon that time, or was it still a little slippery and moving around?
No, I got the first time that I realized it. I think I've
hmm
been in the wrong so many times, but this was 18 and I realized it.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a really interesting, and the emotional impact once you understand that this is the first time. Oh, that's when I knew. Um, Anybody else have that same experience, or did you struggle with trying to figure out
I
where you
remember the
land?
shame. I remember the shame that I felt for the
Mm,
first time was yeah, I was 9 years old, and we were on the island in Croatia, and it was springtime, and it was kind of very beautiful blue skies and clear, still sea. The Adriatic was just crisp and clear, and we were on the beach in our anoraks and in our trainers and tennis shoes and jeans and sort of bundled up, spring weather. And my sister was there and my mother was there and I was there, and a friend, Dee Dee Judd, had come with us from London. She was a friend of ours from England. And she came with us, and we were looking at the water. We were standing on the pier and just saying, oh my God, it's so beautiful. And the sun is so gorgeous. And God, wouldn't you love to go swimming? And I said, oh my God, I just want to jump in. And Dee Dee said, oh, me too, me too, me too. And I said, oh, let's do it. And she goes, and I said, you first. And so she jumped in. And it was freezing. And she's like, oh my God, it's so cold. Oh my God, it's so cold. Oh my God, it's so cold. And then my mother and my sister turned to me and she said, it's your turn. And I said, I don't want to go in, it's too cold. And I was like, they looked at me like, you're disgusting. And Dee Dee said, you shouldn't come in, it's too cold. You shouldn't come in, it's too cold. And I was mortified. And I knew that I really was really, really bad.
That's a good example. Notice how when you were telling the story, it was so full of animation. You were so engaged in it.
Yeah.
Anybody else have an experience like that? Because our official version of things is different, really. We want to be right. We want to play the good role. We do it all in order, if you will. And when you realize you were maybe not doing that, like you thought you were supposed to, it changes things. And we're going to move to this. We're going to stay on this. So I'm just building up a little bit of momentum emotionally so we can do this next exercise. Anybody else want to reflect on it? When you were in the wrong?
Well, I guess like Katie, I remembered sort of being in the wrong, pushing my sister in the swimming pool because she was afraid to jump in. But I'd always been that sort of kid, always doing, naughty things that I didn't, and my dad laughed, so I didn't think it was like so bad. But it was then when I was 18 and I was, my mom was Irish Catholic, brought up pretty strict, knew right from wrong, living on my own in Tokyo, kind of crazy, wild fashion industry life. And one of my dearest friends, we were getting a cab to the disco, and there was all this hustle and bustle, and Japan is very, very honest. Well, it was before we all made it dishonest with our thieving. But Karen, she took a wad of 10,000 yen notes from the taxi driver's wallet, and she sort of stared with me with a twinkle in her eye. And I had at that moment an opportunity to say, don't do it. And I sort of egged her on, and she took the money. I mean, it was a lot of money and we didn't even really need it. And we got into the disco, and I don't remember how she dished it out to me, but she gave me half. And then I remember the taxi driver 10 minutes later coming in to the disco, and it was pitch black. We're all, gaijins is what they would call us. And I'm sure we all look the same to this particular guy. And his head was down. He looked so distraught, like that was all of his money for the month, maybe. And my heart's beating. I feel so ashamed that we'd stolen his hard-working money. But I knew that we couldn't say we did it because we'd be deported. And so years later, I'm in Milan, and my passport's stolen, my portfolio's stolen, my backpack's stolen. I just buried my boyfriend who'd been killed in a car accident. And that taxi driver came to me as if the universe was saying, now you know how that feels. You know, that poor man couldn't feed his family. And so anyway, I guess in that disco, when I saw that poor man coming in looking for the thief who took his money, there was nothing, it was just such, I felt so ashamed. And I sort of carried that with me for years. And every time something terrible would happen to me, it was like, well, that's what you get for, that's the Irish Catholic
Karma.
guilt of my mother. That's what you get. You took the money from the taxi driver and you ruined his life. And anyway, so yes, awful.
That's exactly what we're talking about. And when I hear that story, I feel absolutely awful, even though my mother said you're not that empathetic. When I think of the taxi driver losing all of that money and coming back in desperate to find it, and you knowing that was happening and you still didn't do anything, it makes me feel awful. You were definitely in the wrong.
Oh, 1,000%.
Yeah. And we've all, and I don't know if we have all done that or not, but I have, like with the quail, I did that. It was a different scene. It wasn't, but it was still the same shame, the same, man. And I still to this day wish I hadn't done that. If I could go back and redo it, but we can't. That's what makes this so powerful. And that's why when we write from the imaginative point of view, rather than from the official point of view, like you start to remember it, and then it really affects you emotionally. And when that immediacy starts to happen, it reads to the audience. That's what makes a story work. And I'm not interested in I'm not interested in what I'm interested in is how that changed you. So I could hear the change as you told the story now, all these years later, you know. Anyway, anybody else want to reflect on that before we do this? We have enough time to do this right now. I'm keeping track of the time. Okay. Sue has her story. I have mine. Katie has hers. We've identified that. One variation you could do on this exercise as you're working with your writing, you could change it from time when I was in the wrong until a time when you absolutely knew you had the timing wrong. When I was a little boy, my mother's church group came down to visit, and they were all gathered around in the living room, and I couldn't have been more than 4 or 5, and I was in my underwear. It was summertime, so all I had on was my underwear, and I was a naked little boy except for the underwear. And I thought, well, if I hide behind the couch and then jump out and boo all of the church ladies in my underwear, it will be a big thing, right? And so I did. I boo, I yelled, and they just looked at me and didn't do anything. My timing was completely wrong. Or another thing you could think of is when you knew you were in the wrong and you were deliberately in the wrong and you did it anyway. I know this is wrong, but I'm still going to do it. And you could go down the list. You could create all kinds of scenarios and mine your memories and let your imagination play out, because memory is, you can be suspicious of your memories anyway. You don't quite remember it right. So this last prompt is titled The Need That Drives You. So think about the time when you were in the wrong. And if you're not exactly sure, choose one that you listed. And we're going to spend 10 minutes and write about that time. Sue told a bit of the story. Katie told a bit of hers. I told a bit of mine. What did you want? And what did you need? So when you were in that taxi with your friend and she stole that money, what did you want? What were your needs? What did you want? What was driving you? What desires did you have? What did you desire? What were you after? What was I after when I shot those quail? I was after being an adult. I wanted to grow up. I wanted to be accepted by the men in the group. I wanted to feel like I had done something significant. So those were the things I need. Why did I want to grow up? Why did I need to do that? What's behind that? What did I desire? And maybe those wants and needs are still there. So take 10 minutes and generate a piece of writing based on when you were in the wrong, and tell us about what you needed, what you wanted, what your desires were. And you can do that now. Off you go. Okay, close it down. We have plenty of time to read the work. In doing this kind of exploration, you discover likely that maybe you weren't as good as you thought you were. Maybe you've transgressed more than you officially think of yourself as transgressing, or maybe not. I don't know. Um, and in this writing, you start to confess to yourself what's up with you. This stuff doesn't necessarily have to go out of the house. You can keep it private. And yet, if you keep it private to yourself and you don't ever explore it, then your life will be a little less interesting than if you make it public to yourself. Any thoughts on what you wrote? What needs? Anything that you discovered about these things that drive you? And we'll have a little bit of chat about that, and then I'll ask you to read. Um, Sue's shaking her head. Love to hear from those of you who haven't said much tonight. That'd be nice to get some reflection there as well. Sue?
I'm happy to hear from other people, but
I know, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So, Mary, Dar,
Yeah.
Barbara, Martin.
And I'll talk.
Yeah, go ahead.
Um, I was the cherished one in my family. I was an only child. I was, you know, the good girl, the beautiful girl, the glue that kept my parents together. And my mother had, OCD, which wasn't diagnosed at that time. So everything had to be perfect about me. And I was never allowed to say no or argue with them. And, I wanted to live up to their expectations. So in this one incident, when I was bad the first time, it was liberating for me to we vandalized a house when we were children, and just throwing tomatoes at a brand new construction and breaking all the windows with rocks. And I was just scared, and I felt horrified that I was doing it. But they were saying, Darlene, stop being such a baby, stop being such a goody two shoes, throw some tomatoes. And they finally got me to participate. And I remember I had to go back to the house that all of our parents were at because we were all at a party or something. And when the police actually showed up about 2 hours later and said, this house is brand new home is damaged. And my parents said, well, Darlene had nothing to do with it. She would never do something like that. And they're all looking at me, and I went, I didn't do it. The boys, I totally denied. I was so afraid of my mother that I denied completely that I participated. And I never told them that I did. And
Oh
they
my
believed
gosh.
I
To
never
this day?
I mean, well, yeah, to this day.
They
Because
never knew.
it's been something that they ever brought up again. They just thought those kids are bad, you're not. And we never talked about it again.
Wow.
Till tonight, I'm confessing they're, not here anymore. But Yes, I threw a lot of tomatoes and broke some windows. And I was only like 6 or 7. I was very small. And the
Threw
boy,
some other kids under the bus.
I did, and that's a horrible thing to do. And I did it because I was so afraid of the wrath of losing my position in the family, like just disappointing,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all of my life I tried to live up to that. And on the side did lots of strange things that they wouldn't be proud of. Yeah.
Anybody
So
else? Mary, what about you?
Well, it's an interesting exercise. I've been working on the Storyworth book. I don't know if any of you know of Storyworth, but I was given the Storyworth program as a Christmas gift. And essentially it has questions that you answer about your life. And I'm going back and sort of editing line by line because I'm about done with it. But one of them, one of the questions, did you, and for the most part, I was a very good kid, except when I was about 10. And so I've known about these stories and I've written about them, but I've just been, actually today I was working on it. And I think the exercise tonight was interesting because I was able to sort of go a little deeper in terms of a friend of mine. We both had a parent as an alcoholic, and our homes were not quite what would have been ideal. And we were basically good kids, but a new student came to town, and she was a very vulnerable, fragile gal. And what got into us, it wasn't anything we sat down and talked about, but we followed her home one day and threw snowballs at her. And I, this was, and I've been aware of this for a long time, but there was a lot of projection for both of us. This was a
Mm,
vulnerable human being in the world. And we were living in worlds where we could not be vulnerable. And if we
amazing.
were to show that, we were parentified. We had to keep our stuff together psychologically. And that we my friend and I had no idea that that's what that was about. But I still feel badly to this day about that gal. But I remember the light in the living room when I came home. I remember exactly what my mother said.
Mm.
And never did anything again because we had both been hauled into the principal's office, which was night and day from what most people thought about us. But our needs were erupting and coming out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The needs. What did you need? Why did you do that? What was your desire? Barbara, do you have any thoughts on this?
Mine was more of a rebellion and not still an exploration of whether it was actually whether I was actually wrong. And I know that I was punished.
Mm.
And it was a creative punishment. I had to write an essay, 1,000-word essay at age 12,
Funny.
and on why I disobeyed. And it was something I haven't really written about, but it stood out because it was likely a first rebellion, a first exercise of my independence.
Okay. So it wasn't necessarily wrong, like,
Well, it was wrong because I did disobey, but it was a disobedience. I was watching a television show after my bedtime, and I had a babysitter, and she told them.
Mhm.
but you didn't shoot the screen out
He was just a little naughty.
like I did once
Oh dear.
with a
Oh
BB gun.
dear. Oh dear.
The BB gun, I just shot the screen out at my uncle's house with my BB gun. I haven't thought about that till you said I was watching TV.
Oh.
I did it by accident, of course. I wouldn't ever dream, but I
Oh,
loved the fact that I did it afterwards. I was like, that was great. I should do it, try that again. Nothing much happened, I don't recall. Martin,
you and the
some,
guns.
well,
Oh,
we were
Martin.
country boys. What am I going to say? No guns in my life now, Martin.
No, I'm not judging.
I know you're not.
Mhm.
You're muted.
Thank you. When I was pretty young, uh, I was out with a friend and we were walking around the neighborhood and they must have been doing some paving somewhere. And we got tar all over our tennis shoes, which was not a big deal. But for some unexplicable reason, we went home to my house. We walked in the dining room, and I had never done this before, and certainly it didn't do it in the after that. But we both sat down next to the wall and put our feet up on the wall, and it made a mess. And I don't think you could even clean that. I think my parents probably had to paint that wall. And I thought, what a stupid, dumb kid thing to do. Anyway, there's no getting around that being wrong. And I forget what the punishment was. It must have been I don't remember it, but it must have been noteworthy because I never thought about doing anything like that again.
Now, your parents could have taken another approach. They could have walked in and gone, "Oh my God," and taken a Sharpie and wrote, "Footprints for sale, art piece, $3,000. The wall is yours."
Mhm.
Those were the
Oh
good
my
old
God. Well, that's the way life is. So let's read. We have time to hear who would like to read first, and we'll just offer one of the things you did today, and we'll take us down to the bottom of the third hour, and we'll be through. Who wants to start?
Oh, I'll go.
Okay, Barbara, you go, and then Martin, you follow.
Okay.
I don't know why I said yes. I'd never done it before and I was still in training, but I said I'd do it and I was scared. I was scared because the first time I got up to teach, I fainted on my mat. Nerves got to me. I wanted it to be right, be perfect. I held my breath and went down. Don't remember the rest of the class, but there's a certificate somewhere in a drawer that says I did. The second training was harder, and when it came to the final, I was to open with a philosophical talk to set the tone. I remembered fainting on my mat and balked at sitting in the front leading the prayer. The instructor said, "You know, you don't have to do this." I swallowed and did it anyway, reading word for word from the page. But this time it mattered more. They were old and had Alzheimer's and didn't know what chair yoga was. When I arrived, the program director looked at me in a panic and something clicked in. I had to do this. My mouth opened and words came out. "Let's everybody breathe." I counted 1, 2, 3, 4, exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. And they did. And I said, if you're breathing, you're doing yoga. Several years later, I randomly met one of the students on the bus. She said she had to thank me. She'd been in Paris, had a stroke, and didn't know the language. But what calmed her down was that simple count. 1, 2, 3, 4, exhale 1, 2, 3, 4, Om.
Nice. Okay. Thank you, Barbara. Martin, what do you have for us?
Okay. Make sure I'm okay. When I was very young and going to elementary school, or in fact, early in elementary school, my mother at some point wanted or needed, and I'm not sure which, needed to take a job. And so I went to a babysitter after school and really hated it. no cookies after school, etc. And I just didn't like it. And I let my parents know that I was unhappy about the situation. Well, I withstood the babysitter for some time, but was not happy about it. And at some point, my mother quit the job. And for me, things went back to normal. But as I am thinking about it now, I can see that I was quite selfish and self-centered. And my parents were trying to get some extra money coming into the coffers. But my selfishness and outright wrongness caused them to change their plans to accommodate me. Now that I can think back on it, it makes me sad because I am sure my parents, were trying to make a better life for all of us. And my comfort level was just too important to me. And I now feel a bit ashamed over my demands and should have apologized for it when they were still alive. I think I realized early when it first happened, I said, I got what I wanted. But then it wasn't too long after that I realized that it wasn't I shouldn't have done that. Anyway.
So that was when you were in the wrong.
That was when I was in the wrong. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Mary, and then Dar, Katie, and then Sue. Mary.
I'm reading from the prompt on the role, which one suited you best, or so on. As a truth teller, my body told me what direction to go, what words to form when I spoke, as though I had no choice but to acknowledge what I saw or felt. But when I was young, it was difficult to say the words. I didn't understand it all and assumed I was in the wrong. But that betrayed my body. The event registered there. But I betrayed myself by assuming I was wrong. It was always that way as a child. But as I grew, I knew I wasn't wrong. My observations were correct, and I found more and more of my voice, even though it took so long. Well, I'm pleased to have taken this path. There's such relief when it's said out loud. It also bears down when considering the risk to calling something by name. As a child, it could be physical harm or abandonment. As an adult, opposition, rejection, abandonment, perhaps seen as a traitor to the status quo, about how often it heals. To only speak of the unspoken.
To only speak of the unspoken. Nice. Dar, what do you have?
I'll read the one of taking on a role. I've paid so many of them. I'm in line at the city yoga dam. I hold a mango, perhaps a dethorned rose, feeling pious, spiritual, perhaps. I've been living here a month now. It's time to receive a spiritual name, a special name with a vibration that characterizes one's essence. My turn finally comes. Baba slaps me with his peacock feather and tells his translator, Suradevi, okay, Suradevi. Upon receiving this name, I find the definition in the ashram library, the girl whose father was a god, and she lived in the courts of kings holding the key to the wine cabinet. Well, that just about hit the nail on the head. Dad was godlike, loved by all, humble, generous, almost outside of this world's trappings. He was my god for sure, and I played his very good girl. A life as a social butterfly defined me, always up for a good time. Every party, large or small, I was on the guest list. I made them laugh and certainly was the queen of the wine cabinet, a good time gal, a party gal. No court of any king left me on the outside looking in. Playing this role energized me. I was confident and knew how to work a room, create amazing salon-type dinner parties. I knew I could turn a dull moment and make it dance. Darlene was glamorous and something casual, honest, and added a certain frivolity to any occasion. Is this enough to sustain a life when the party is over? I don't think so. Sarah Davy, she held the key and danced in the courts of kings, but courtesan, court gesture, party girl, that's not a life.
Mm,
Mm.
nice. And that is true. Katie, what about you? And then Sue, you can close.
This is the prompt. When did I take myself back?
Okay.
Or might I still need to? And how does your body feel? Standing at the pawn shop when I'm dropping off rings and silverware to raise some money to get through a tight time. The man behind the counter is carrying a small instrument case. He opens it and shows it to me. He's excited to have it in his hands. And when he opens the box and puts the pieces together, I mentioned that I was supposed to play the flute. It was the one instrument I was interested in as a child. And my mother guilted me into feeling like I wouldn't take it seriously and that it was expensive, and she simply didn't have faith in my pursuing it. Even after the flute teacher came over and let me try and told me I had a natural gift for it, and so I didn't insist. The piano she wanted stood in the living room for decades. It matched the carpet in the hallway and the Abyssinian cat and the marquetry wood floors, but no one in the family played it. But many wonderful memories of internationally renowned conductors and pianists who stayed with us, tinkled the ivories, and filled the house with alchemical musical magic, like gold to airy thinness beat. I have the piano now, which got shipped to me when my mother informed me that she couldn't sell it for much when she was moving from London. And it arrived with a dining room table and dining room chairs and the buffet and boxes of my childhood books and vintage magazine collection from the 1930s through to the 70s. And so when I was at the pawn shop and the salesman handed me the flute, I blew into it. And instantly I was back in the living room in London at the age of 11 and blowing into the mouthpiece. And the haunting hoot of the flute air issued forth like not a day had passed. I told him I couldn't justify taking it since I really needed the money I was pawning for. But he assured me of its low price and that it would be there when I came back. And I said if it was, I would buy it.
Mhm.
Ooh,
Mhm.
very nice. Well done. Okay, Sue, close us out.
You're muted.
Yeah, I haven't started yet. I'm trying to figure out which one to read. And I think I'm going to do something called wasn't it How You Regained Your Power? We had something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
I remember his feet behind me, the sound of the shower, the warm water crashing down my back. I don't remember the color of the tiles, but his feet would change position and I would watch them leaning back on his heels, and then he would rise onto his toes again. The water in the hairs of his brown legs. I saw the hair between his toes. My head was down in the hot water cascading down my face. I could hear him moaning, and I would join in, pretending this was enjoyable, that my young 19-year-old self was as experienced as him. I wanted to please him, me, the little girl pleaser. Is that who I was? trying to please my big, brave, handsome, worldly, smart, smart, smart man. I often look back and wonder why I didn't tell the truth, speak up. In so many other areas of my life, I would, but with him, having his sex, I wanted to please him so he would love me. Funny, that sounds so ridiculous writing it down, that I silenced myself, that I was so besotted with this strong, intelligent older man that I became mute to what I really liked. Mute. Me, I was mute. Over the months, the years, I found my voice. I would tell him it hurts. I would announce, I don't like it. I remember his deep whispers trying to calm me, trying to make me understand that I was mature for doing it. But all I felt was my little girl inside. It took years before I grew up, before I could finally say no to him. And I did say no to him, going with him to Italy. I finally said no. God, there is so much more to tell of how I finally chose me.
Talk about take back.
Mhm.
Any thoughts on what you heard? Reflections?
I've just been realizing the story I thought I was going to write is not the story at all.
Do tell. What
Well,
is it?
all these little snippets are way more powerful. Something that you said earlier about when you structure it all out and then you feel you have no energy, or I forget what you said exactly.
Yeah, when you
But
when you getting ready to write your memoir, you'll sit down and you'll say, "This is the story I want to tell, and this is how I
yeah,
want to tell it, and I know what I've done, and I have this story that the world needs to hear, and this is how it's going to happen." And
right. And
and you're like, so you don't even care because there's nothing to look for.
yeah. So I had written a play, a one-woman show that had done really well and traveled all over the world doing it. And I had decided I was going to write, that was going to be my memoir, but there's no energy with that. And doing these little things that we've been doing, I realized I'm not quite sure exactly what the story is, but there's so much more material from what we're digging up, which is way more organic than a story I've already told in a different format. I don't know. I mean, I was listening to NPR and there was a woman on who'd written a memoir called Hollow. And so it was the 18-year-old Mormon who joined the Marines. And I've got to read it, but she ended up talking about, she spent 3 years in the Marines and she was struggling with eating disorders and all sorts of stuff and trying to be macho and please. And in her Mormon religion, they'd always looked up to men. Men were so important. And so she sort of silenced herself so that she wouldn't be seen as weak. Anyway, I just have been thinking about her memoir and then all, a lot of these little snippets that we're writing of, I don't know, I'm just thinking about what I just wrote about staying mute for a while and how maybe I've overcompensated by being so opinionated now. I mean,
Right.
and making up for that time. I don't know. I'm exploring it.
I mean, it's difficult to figure out how to write a memoir. I'm saying that from a personal point of view. Allegra talks about the memoir she wrote, and she has a sense of how all of that goes together. And I don't. I'm not sure, okay? What kind of story do I tell about myself? Now, what I do know, or what I'm thinking is, I mean, and I've learned this working all through this last 5 years. And a memoir is not a story of your life. It's just a story where you are in a part of a story that you want to tell in your life, and you are the main character. And something happens, something changes in the course of that story that that is a universal kind of change that allows people who encounter this story to change as well. But it's not the full story. And one of the luxury problems that we all have is we've all lived such rich lives with so many variables and actions. And, Katie, I grew up here and then I came here and I did this and then I did that, or I did the one woman show and I toured it, or Barbara, I worked in the advertising business and I produced big advertising things, or whatever it is you've done. And it can be really, really confusing. And that's why I'm so interested in this idea of the manageable memoir, like the 100 poems I wrote. Okay, it's 100 days. Here's what happened each day. This is a memoir. Um, so
Yeah. This woman wrote about 3 years in her life.
yeah. Yeah. And so it might be worth thinking about as we move into, and let me make sure that as the bottom of the hour comes around, I want to make sure that I just touch on the Surf the Storm, which is coming up. So as you're thinking about how am I going to be a storyteller? How am I going to deliver this? I just realized I've done 300 podcasts over the last 8.5 years, all online. So I have 300 hours of stories, and so that means I put 3,000 hours into creating these 300 stories, and they're all on radio. They're all on my platform. I don't really have any reason to do it other than I just keep doing it, right? So that's me as a storyteller. So if you were to listen to all 300 of those stories, you would learn everything you need to know about where I'm coming from, because it's a conversation between two people. And how do you tell your story? So surf the storm, your own tender spots. So go back in session 7, we talked about those tender spots. So review that. And when you talk about your tender spots, and when we talked about when we were in the wrong, we told us, oh, I did this and I did that, and I really, really blew it, and I knew it. And there were consequences, there are emotional consequences, where it's just so powerful, you can't get over it, like stealing all that money in Japan. That's very powerful. I won't get over that. That was really, really wrong. And you knew it. So when you look at your tender spots, ask, what kind of judgments do you make of yourself? How am I judging myself? How do I see myself? Am I really looking at myself as I think I should be looked at by others? What kind of judgments do you make about how the world works? What kind of default settings are baked into you? Where do you go? So just play around with that. You can write about it. You can make notes about it. Just think of it as research. And as we're telling our stories, I wish I could say, here's how you do a memoir, but I don't know. But I do know that the imagination will create an impulse for you. And if you follow that impulse, you're going to come up with something. And I'll just close by saying, yesterday I've been working with a poem written by W.H. Auden called The Unknown Citizen. And I'll show you what I did. So I'm sitting here in this place, and I'm sitting on this couch thinking I want to record the unknown citizen. And I'm looking up at those stairs, thinking, what if I stood on those stairs, looked down at all of the people looking up at me, and what if I recited the unknown citizen? But what if I talked about it before and then made some comments afterwards, all up on that stair, as if I'm the person in the unknown citizen? The unknown citizen is a state representative giving a eulogy for a person who was perfect, who never did anything wrong. Nothing was out of place. Perfect all the way down the line. And then the eulogy, the state representative, says he, and he was married and added 5 children to the population, which is, our eugenist says, is the proper number for a parent of his generation. And our teachers report that he never interfered with their education. So that's the very end. He's just done everything right. So somewhere in the back, somebody says, was he free? Was he happy? Some distant voice. And the state representative said, oh, the question is absurd. Had there anything been wrong, we should certainly have heard. It's just oozing with political power, commentary, everything. So I did it on that step. And so in conclusion, I let my imagination, what if I did it up there? So I just rigged my camera, pointed the camera up, mic'd it up, and went up there and did it. And now it's on Facebook. I just did it and posted it. Bam, here you go. Take it away. Tomorrow's another day. So when you let your imagination follow those beats without too much question, there's going to be energy in it, and it's going to be messy, but it will always be interesting and compelling. And 3 nights ago, we were at the beach, and I sat down on a chair, waves lapping behind me, dark light shining from the hotel, but you couldn't tell it was the light. And I recited The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe at the beach, completely out of context.
Mm-hmm.
And it was very dark. You could hardly see my face. Is that my memoir? Is that my story? I don't know. But it was an interesting impulse that I followed. So, my friends, this brings us to the bottom of our time together. Anybody have anything to say before we go? Stu has to go.
Mm-hmm.
Much grace and love to you, Sue. Everybody else, anything else? So
Have a great
we
week.
will.
Happy Thanksgiving.
We'll see you next time. Happy
Happy
Thanksgiving.
Thanksgiving.
I forgot about that. Yes, a holiday. All right. Enjoy. More to
Bye-bye.
come. Bye.